Captain Sunshine here. Lord's Army, retired. Spreading the love, spreading the joy. In my very first YouTube video, that's right, this is my very first YouTube video, we'll be talking about the dark side of faith, and if that's even a thing. But first, I need my coffee. I'm not really going to get through this without my coffee. Honey, where's my coffee? I asked for it 20 minutes ago. Honey, baby? Never mind. Lord, you know my needs, and I'm not going to get through this without my coffee. Please make it so. Thank you. Where were we? Yes, the dark side of faith. Is it even really a thing? I got a phone call from a friend of mine who I'm going to refer to as my friend because it involved her friend, who I will refer to as her friend. And her friend is going through a crisis of faith. She's angry at God. She's mad at herself. She's ready to give up. Now, her friend has been struggling with cancer. 2 years ago, when my friend first talked to me about this, she gave me her friend's diagnosis, and my reaction was to encourage my friend, because walking with someone down the last mile of life is a very difficult thing to do. But it has its rewards. It can be not just one of the most difficult and painful things in life, but it can be one of the most rewarding things in life. And I was trying to build up my friend and explain this. And this is not what my friend wanted to hear 2 years ago, because her religious background and her friend's religious background is more fundamentalist Christian than that, where you live by faith and you trust in God, and these types of things are challenges to be worked through, and you have faith in God and He will carry you through them. And she wanted me to build up her faith and to help her to build up her friend's faith so that she can fight and win this thing. Now, understand, this isn't just about life and death and dying. We all die. This is about keeping the faith, because with some religious mindsets, keeping the faith is everything. And so this struggle is one that a lot of people go through and deal with. So I told my friend that her friend was struggling with the dark side of faith. And my friend did not want to hear this. Her reaction was, the dark side of faith is not a thing. It is not a thing. And I was not being of any help to her whatsoever. Now, she's not alone in this thinking. I mentioned this conversation to another friend of mine who's a fundamentalist Baptist. He's a preacher. And he agreed with my friend that faith does not fail. There is no dark side of faith. If a person goes through a crisis of faith, it's because they failed. And this is a standard, typical Christian response, especially as you lean towards the more fundamental sides of Christianity. Now, I mentioned this same subject to another friend of mine, and she just chuckled. She had never heard it described as the dark side of faith, but she's been through the ringer of life. She has been kicked around, and she has struggled, and she knows what it's like to go through hard times. And she understood exactly what I meant by the dark side of faith. And she understood that it is completely a thing. I told my friend that her friend, because of her beliefs, which are based on her spiritual upbringing and teaching, have put her in the very unfortunate and precarious position where religious teaching is put to the ultimate test. There are practical limits to faith. And when those limits are exceeded, depending on our beliefs about faith, we may find ourselves dealing with and setting ourselves up for the dark side of faith. Now, exactly what is the dark side of faith? The simplest answer it is when we blame ourselves for the shortcomings of the faith that we have been taught. That's a very simplistic answer. All of us can relate to the dark side of faith, and I'm going to show you. I'm going to read a poem that everybody has heard, everybody is familiar with, especially Christians. It's a very popular Christian poem. It's called Footprints in the Sand. Let me get a sip of coffee. One night, I dreamed a dream. And as I was walking along the beach with my Lord, across the dark sky flashed scenes from my life. For each scene, I noticed two sets of footprints in the sand, one belonging to me and one to my Lord. After the last scene of my life flashed before me, I looked back at the footprints in the sand. I noticed that at many times along the path of my life, especially at the very lowest and saddest times, there was only one set of footprints. This really troubled me, so I asked the Lord about it. Lord, you said once I decided to follow you, you'd walk with me all the way. But I noticed that during the saddest and most troublesome times of my life, there was only one set of footprints. I don't understand why, when I needed you the most, you would leave me. He whispered, my precious child, I love you and will never leave you, never ever during your trials and testings. When you saw only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you. This is where Christians gush and gaw and start to feel bad about ever having doubts. There is so much of the typical Christian mindset that is wrapped up in this poem. So much so that it virtually all Christians resonate with the core symbology in this poem. The idea that you were crazy to ever think you went through those things alone, and that you should feel bad and guilty for ever having felt those things, and that this poem brings you back to in line with the mindset that you're supposed to have and believe as a Christian. I call that spiritual gaslighting, and religion does a lot of that. Now, what do I mean by this is spiritual gaslighting? Let me give you another analogy. It's not a poem, it's just a little story to illustrate my point. Imagine a child that needs to go on a journey, perhaps to escape a war, perhaps to escape a famine. But the child needs to go a long distance on a journey, and she is going with her father. Now, along the journey, they need to move quickly, and at times she can't keep up, and she's struggling to keep up. And when she can't keep up anymore, her father picks her up and carries her. Now, it is in those moments that she actually gets rest. That in those moments, she is not scared anymore. She's not stressed out. She's not unable to keep up because she is safe in her father's arms. Perhaps when she hasn't been able to sleep for who knows how long, she can sleep in her father's arms as he trudges through the night. She can feel his breathing. She can feel his heartbeat. And she gets rest and feels ever so close to her father. Perhaps during this journey, there's times when there's huge rocks that they need to climb over, and she can't climb over the rocks, but her father can. And he climbs over the rocks and reaches back down and picks up the child, lifts her up to where he is, and then they can carry on their journey. Perhaps there's times when they need to cross a river and she can't walk across the river. It's too deep, but her father can. And so she goes across the river on her father's shoulders, safe above the waters. Now, imagine this child looking back on this journey after it's over with. Is she going to remember those toughest parts of the journey and ask her father, "Why did you abandon me?" No. She's going to remember those times of the journey as the dearest, because those were the times when she was the closest to her father. Those were the times when he was holding her the closest, when he was protecting her the most, when he was carrying her. She would have remembered those times because she lived through those times and she experienced those times. My little story, my little imagined scenario is a lot more like the walk of faith that religion promises us. That during the hardest times of our life, God is there to pick us up and carry us. This footprints in the sand, it's a lot more like the experience that religion actually delivers. And it resonates in the hearts of so many people because this is the experience they have. When they go through the darkest, most troubled times of their life, they do it alone. And it is spiritual gaslighting to tell them, "Oh, you got through that because God carried you through that." If God was there, they would have felt his presence. If God was there, they would have felt the most at ease, the most comfort during the hardest parts of those journeys. But Captain Sunshine, God makes promises in his book. And I'm just glossing over those promises. He makes promises about faith. If you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, there's people in the Bible healed of all kinds of things. People brought back from the dead. Amazing stories of faith in the book. And I'm just glossing over. These are promises that God made. Well, I'm going to ask you, how do you know that? How do you know that the things written by men in this book are actually promises of God? And there really is a very simple test. It's a lot simpler than you think. How do you know if God actually promised something? It's simple. If God promises, God delivers. But if there is a built-in excuse that blames you for a promise's failure, then it's not of God. I said it's very simple, and it is, but it's a hard pill to swallow because we get to analyze our beliefs and everything we have understood, everything we have ever been taught. Let me ask you this. Is God less of a person than I am? I seriously doubt that he is. Yet, if I promise you something and I don't deliver, it's on me. It's my bad. And if your religion or your pastor or your understanding of scriptures makes promises in God's name and then blames you when those promises fail, I assure you, God is not in it. Those are the types of blame games that humans play. And I'm pretty sure that we can expect better of God. In fact, I know that we can. If I were talking to my friend's friend, I would tell her that she has not failed God. I know her to be a decent, loving child of God who, at the end of the day, has done her very best. And I am so sorry that she has been taught things that have led her to this place on the dark side of faith. But there is a path out. There is a path back into the light. And that path starts with rejecting everything that you've ever been taught that has led you to the dark side of faith. It's a very simple path, but it's not an easy path. There is so much more about this topic, about faith, about the dark side of faith, about how we get here, how religious teachings set us up for it. I have not even scratched the surface. I have not touched the tip of the iceberg. And in future videos, we'll explore more on this, because the dark side of faith is not just a subject for a video. If I were inclined to actually write a book, I could write a multi-volume book on this very subject. In fact, the dark side of faith is the story of my life. So in the future, in coming videos, we'll talk more about this. In the meantime, peace and grace to you, my friend.